I believe the best mission you can give your life to is two loves. Love God with all you are and love your neighbor with all you have. Do that and you will be complete. Do that and everything else God requires of you will be fulfilled. Now, most of us nod our heads to that. We know it's what Jesus taught, and yet the lack of love in the church is so profound that many are leaving disillusioned. But the truth is, the lovelessness begins with us. If anyone leaves, let it not be in condemnation, but in conviction. Let it not be leaving only, but a pursuit of love, the pursuit of Christ, the pursuit of faithfulness, and the restoration of love as the way of Jesus. If anyone would abandon anything at all, let it be lovelessness. Let it be to cling to this simple mission of loving God with all we are and loving our neighbors with all we have. Can you imagine if we would just do that? Last week I challenged you to the first love, to love God with all you are, with all your emotion, all your devotion, and all you own. If you're not doing that, you're not loving God with all you are. Today I'm challenging you to the second love, to love your neighbor with all you have. Because if you're not doing that, you're not loving God with all you are. This is what Jesus taught, and it's what the early believers practiced. Yeah, it sounds impractical, even reckless, but it's so profound, and I believe it's what your heart has been waiting for. So that's what I want to talk about today. We read in Matthew 22 that an expert in the law tested Jesus with this question: "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied by quoting Deuteronomy 6:5, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." He said, this is the first and greatest commandment. And then he said, the second is like it. And he quoted Leviticus 19:18, "Love your neighbor as yourself." And he said, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Everything that's ever been written in Scripture is all about these two loves, love for God and love for your neighbor. And it's impossible to separate the two. Now, it's tempting to just focus on loving God, like just wake up and do your devotions every day, do your best to live a pure life every day, go to church and worship God passionately every week. Doing that makes us feel satisfied and fulfilled. But when it comes to loving our neighbors as love for God, not so much. Neighbors don't always respond well. Neighbors don't always love us back. Neighbors sometimes hate us. Neighbors can be rude and insulting and insensitive and overbearing. And Jesus said love for them is love for God. The way he said it, if the first and greatest commandment is to love God, the second is just like it, love your neighbor. It's the same teaching in Mark 12 and Luke 10. This wasn't a one and done teaching. This is what Jesus believed about this. This is what his disciples heard him explain often. Paul would write in Galatians 5:13 and 14 that we're to serve one another humbly in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Of course, that wasn't a new thought with Jesus. It was what God had always taught through his prophets, but now Jesus was here in the flesh saying over and over again, in many ways, what he said in John 13:34, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Now, to love wasn't a new command. It was a command to renew love. Love God with all you are and love your neighbor with all you have. But what did he really mean by love? It's tempting to make it a riddle because then we get to interpret it. I've heard people say this is about learning to love ourselves. They borrow from pop psychology and they say, you can't really love someone else unless you first learn to love yourself. So what Jesus is really saying here is that you need to work on loving yourself first, then you can work on loving others. But that's the opposite of what he's saying. Not that the need for self-care isn't a thing, but to make this a statement about self-care misses the point. This isn't a riddle. Jesus is simply saying, in the same way that it's natural for you to be attentive to your own needs, be attentive to your neighbor's needs. He's saying, just like you love yourself by feeding yourself when you're hungry, sleeping when you're tired, protecting yourself when you're threatened, caring for yourself when you're wounded, and tending to all the various needs and desires you have. In that same way, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love your neighbor with all you have. 1 Corinthians 13 is familiar to many. It says, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but don't have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast but don't have love, I gain nothing." Love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it isn't proud, it doesn't dishonor others. It's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Love is not something we create, it's something we do. We can receive love and we can have it and we can give it and we can withhold it, but we can't keep it. Love can't be stored up or depleted. You don't have a love tank. What you have is a million little choices to do good, to bless, to provide care, to cherish, to love. It's possible to do the things of love and not have love, but it's impossible to not do the things of love and have love. It's impossible to have love and not love. Love gives itself for another's good. That's how we know it's love. 1 John 3:16-18 says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let's not love with words or speech only, but with actions and in truth." If you made it your mission in life to love your neighbor like you love yourself, meaning you decided to offer all you have for their care, would it change how you see your neighbor? Would it change how you treat your neighbor? Would it change how they see you? If it was your mission in life to love God with all you are and to love your neighbor with all you have, would it change anything you do today? If it was your mission in life? Most of us, if we're serious about this, we wonder, which neighbor? Like every neighbor? Even that neighbor? What about the one 2 houses down? What about 4 houses? Is that my neighbor? It's a good question, actually, if we ask it for clarity. In Luke's account, the man Jesus was talking to asked the same question. Luke 10:29-37. The man wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and then they went away, leaving him half dead." He said, "A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.'" Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Jesus asked. The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him," and Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Take note, the man asked, "Who is my neighbor?" and Jesus answered, "Be a good neighbor." When you decide that your mission in life is to love your neighbor with all you have, it means your mission in life is to be a good neighbor. But still we wonder, does that mean I need to be a good neighbor to everyone? I think neighbor should refer to anyone close enough to know. Anyone close enough that we can notice their needs. anyone close enough to us that they actually know whether we care about them or not, whether we love them or not. If you just start there, you will look at your family differently. You'll look to be a good neighbor to the people living under the same roof as you. And you'll look at your friends differently, and workmates and classmates differently, and customers and vendors differently. And yes, you'll look at the people who live next door differently. What would it look like for you to be a good neighbor to the people closest to you? My wife says it like she sees it. I was talking with her about this, using this language of loving our neighbors with all we have. And her mind went where yours probably already went. She was feeling depleted by having overextended herself in love for people who had taken advantage of her and hadn't returned the love. She said, "I'm sorry, I just don't have any extra love to give right now." Now, don't judge her for that. Relate to her in that. We've all been taken advantage of. We've all felt depleted by people who aren't afraid to ask for another thing and another thing and yet another thing. Many of us are burned out on compassion. We actually want to be compassionate, but we've got nothing else to give. What I told my wife in that conversation became clarity for me about this. To love our neighbor with all we have never means loving our neighbor with what we don't have. To love our neighbor with all we have never means loving our neighbor with more than we have. Loving our neighbor with all we have doesn't mean giving them energy and attention that belongs to our children or spouse or job. I mean, sometimes it does, but when it does, we can afford to do it because usually it doesn't. And loving our neighbor with all we have doesn't mean giving them money that we've already committed elsewhere, even if it's in our pocket or in the bank or being set aside for future needs so that we're not a burden on others. I mean, sometimes it does, but when it does, we can afford to do it because usually it doesn't. And loving our neighbor with all we have doesn't mean running ourselves ragged to make their life easy while we pay for it with our own health. I mean, sometimes we will work till we drop, but we can do that because we have the health to do it, because usually we love within our means. And that's the rule of loving with all you have. Love within your means. But here's the key. This isn't about keeping love from affecting you. It's about making love sustainable. Like we already read in 1 John 3, we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. And yet Luke 5 tells us that when crowds of people were coming to hear Jesus and to be healed of their sicknesses, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So love your neighbor with all you have and love within your means. Even if it means giving away your means, just do it in a way that is both generous and sustainable. And if God tells you to give away the house or the car, do it. The early believers were commended for such love. Now, how do you know what love requires? Where do we even start? Start with prayer and go from there. As you love God, you'll love your neighbors because He does. And the two loves will lead you to pray to Him for them. When you pray for the people closest to you, it'll change how you relate to them. Your love for them will grow with every mention of them in prayer. You'll want to know what they're rejoicing over so you can be happy for them in God's presence. You'll want to know what they're afraid of or concerned about so you can intercede for them in God's presence. You'll want to know what they're sad about so that when you're in God's presence, loving Him, you can engage His heart around that same sadness, appealing to God for mercy and comfort. When I advocate in prayer for the people close to me, my love for them grows, and yours will too. And of course, that starts with taking time to talk to them. Again, I'm not talking about talking to everyone, just the people you're close enough to talk to, close enough to know. Be open to them emotionally and relationally. Now, if they're closed off and distant, just know what can be known. See what you can see. Be kind and considerate, sympathetic and empathetic where you can. You'll find that when you take time to engage your heart and mind with what they're experiencing and carry them to God in your prayers, you'll love them. Not because you're supposed to, but because you just do. Because you are. Because you are loving them. And when you spend time praying to God for them, you might just discover how you can be the answer to your prayers by loving them with something you have that they don't have. That doesn't mean it's always a joy to let go of it. And on the other hand, just because you may struggle to let go of something, it doesn't mean there's no joy in giving it. To love your neighbor is to serve their best interest, even ahead of your own. Philippians 2 says, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. Prefer their benefit ahead of your own. Live in such a way that the contribution of your efforts makes their life better. Love your neighbor with all you have. If they're hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. And especially if they're your enemy. If they need a listening ear, give what you can give. If they need encouragement, give what you can give. If they need an attentive heart, give what you can give. If they need money, give what you can give. If they need solitude, give what you can give. If they need counsel, give what you have. If they need hope, give what you have. If they need the gospel, give it, be it, speak it, live it, do it. Start with prayer and go from there. Love your neighbor with all you have. Love within your means. Love them as you would want to be loved. Love them as if they were themselves you. These two loves form the most profound mission we could ever give ourselves to, loving God with all we are and loving our neighbors with all we have. And that mission actually cascades from the one path and 4 devotions of our simple agreement. We follow Jesus as Lord. It's our one and only path. We have no other. And then we devote ourselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. We do this personally, but we also do it in community with other believers. And as we do, we are inspired to fulfill this mission of 2 loves, and we are trained in this mission of 2 loves, and we are sustained in this mission of 2 loves. Through this mission, we fulfill all that God requires of us, to do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with Him, to take care of widows and orphans, to make disciples, baptizing them, and teaching them to obey all Jesus commanded, fully loving as we have been loved. As we follow the one path and practice the 4 devotions, it all keeps leading us to fulfilling the 2 loves. This is the faith, practice, and mission of the simple agreement that I'm proposing, and I think it's good. This concludes the 8-part teaching on all of this. Thanks for paying attention. I'm humbled and honored by that, and I pray that they continue to add meaning to your life. Now, while I hesitate to not teach every week, I feel led to spend the next few weeks in a season of prayer and fasting as I transition from conventional church ministry to this new network of microchurches. Please join me in prayer, asking for clear direction and provision, and especially that God would cause the gospel to bear much fruit among us as we give ourselves to this, and that He would bring many people to renewed faithfulness in it. Like I say, I believe this network is about more than just a different style of church. I believe it is for this time and for what seems to be coming. And that leads me to a season of prayer and fasting. So I don't think I'll be posting new teaching videos for a bit. So please look at that subscribed button to make sure you are subscribed, and click the bell icon so that you're notified the next time I do post a video. Also, click on the link in the description to join my mailing list. I want to communicate more detail by email in the coming weeks. God bless you. We'll talk soon, Lord willing.